The morning my children tried to declare me mentally incompetent, I was pruning my prize-winning orchids in the greenhouse. At 75, I still had steady hands and a clear mind. But apparently, my own flesh and blood had different opinions about that. The first sign of trouble came when all four of them showed up unannounced at Thornfield Manor that crisp October morning. My eldest, Preston, arrived in his Mercedes, followed by the twins, Cordelia and Sebastian, and finally my youngest, Beatrice, who couldn't even look me in the eye as she stepped out of her Tesla. "Mother," Preston began, adjusting his Hermes tie, "we need to have a family discussion." I set down my pruning shears and removed my gardening gloves, noting how they all filed into the conservatory like a jury ready to deliver a verdict. They'd even brought briefcases. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The conservatory at Thornfield Manor had always been my sanctuary. 20-foot glass walls captured the morning light, while hundreds of rare orchids created a living rainbow of colors. I'd built this collection over 40 years, and each bloom held a memory. That particular morning, I was tending to my Ghost Orchid, one of only 12 cultivated specimens in private hands, when my children arrived for their intervention. They arranged themselves in the white wicker chairs like they used to during family meetings, except now their faces wore the calculated expressions of executives closing a deal rather than the children I'd raised. Preston, my eldest at 51, cleared his throat. "Mother, we're concerned about your welfare," he began, opening his leather portfolio. "The family has noticed some troubling behaviors lately." I continued misting my orchids, letting the silence stretch. After 3 decades as CEO of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, I'd learned that silence often provoked more truth than questions. Cordelia jumped in, her voice honeyed with false concern. "You've been forgetting things, Mother. Last week you called me Catherine." "That's your middle name, darling," I replied, adjusting the humidity control. "The one you've used professionally since your divorce. I was simply being respectful of your choices." Sebastian shifted uncomfortably. "There's also the matter of your recent generosity. You donated $50 million to that oceanography institute. The Monterey Aquarium Research Institute needed funding for their deep-sea exploration program. I've always supported marine conservation." "$50 million, Mother," Beatrice finally spoke, her voice shaking. "That's more than most countries' GDP. I turned to face them, studying the 4 figures who'd inherited my green eyes, but apparently not my business acumen. "I'm worth $12 billion. $50 million represents less than 0.5% of my net worth. I spend more on orchid fertilizer each year." Preston extracted a document from his briefcase. "We've consulted with Dr. Harrison Wexler, the psychiatrist whose research I funded for 20 years?" I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "And he's prepared to testify about age-related cognitive decline. We also have several witnesses who've observed concerning behaviors." "Such as?" "You've been seen talking to your flowers," Cordelia said. "I've done that for 50 years. It promotes growth. There are studies—" "You fired Jameson," Sebastian interrupted. "Your father's old secretary? He's 87 and fell asleep during board meetings. I gave him a full pension and a retirement cottage in Bermuda. He sent me a lovely thank you note with a watercolor of the beach." Beatrice leaned forward. "Mother, please understand. We're doing this because we love you. We've set up an appointment with the probate court. With Dr. Wexler's testimony and our observations, we can have you declared legally incompetent. And you 4 appointed as conservators of my estate," I finished. They exchanged glances, and in that moment, I saw everything clearly. This wasn't about my mental fitness. This was about control of the family fortune. "You'll still live here," Preston assured me quickly. "We'll make sure you have the best care, all your comforts." How thoughtful. I walked to my desk and pressed the intercom. Mrs. Abernathy, could you bring tea for my children? Earl Grey for Preston, chamomile for Cordelia, that ghastly green juice Sebastian pretends to like, and… Beatrice. Are you still pretending to be vegan? Yes, Mother. Almond milk latte for Beatrice, then. I released the button and settled into my chair. You know what's fascinating about orchids? They're survivors. The ghost orchid, for instance, can live for decades without soil, drawing nutrients from the air itself. Rather like a clever widow learning to thrive after her husband's death. Preston frowned. What are you talking about? Just making conversation while we wait for tea. Though I must say, this whole intervention feels rather premature. The court date isn't until next Thursday, is it? 4 pairs of eyes widened. Did you really think I wasn't aware? I laughed softly. Darlings, I've been running a pharmaceutical empire for 40 years. I have lawyers who have lawyers. The moment you contacted Dr. Wexler, I knew. Mrs. Abernathy entered with the tea. Service, and I noted with satisfaction that she'd included the antique Wedgwood china, the set worth more than most cars. As she poured, I studied my children's faces. Preston, trying to maintain his composure. Cordelia, calculating her next. Move, Sebastian, fidgeting with his cufflinks. And Beatrice, my baby, unable to meet my eyes. There's something else you should know, I said once Mrs. Abernathy left. Those trust funds your father established, the ones you've been living on for… decades? The room went silent. According to the terms your father and I set, they can be dissolved at any time if I, as primary trustee, determine that the beneficiaries are acting against the family's best interests. You wouldn't, Preston said, but his voice wavered. Wouldn't I? I sipped my tea. Tell me, Preston, how's the new house in the Hamptons? Still having problems with the property taxes? His face flushed. And Cordelia, darling, how's that art gallery? Still operating at a loss? We're building our brand. For 15 years? Remarkable persistence. I turned to Sebastian. How many failed startups is it now? 7? 8? Cryptocurrency is volatile. Indeed. Finally, I looked at Beatrice. And that screenplay you've been writing for 5 years? How's that coming along? This is exactly why we're doing this, Preston exploded. These manipulative games. It's not normal behavior. Neither is trying to have your mother declared incompetent to seize her fortune. I set down my teacup. But let's discuss what happens next. The following hour was what I like to call educational. I explained how their trust funds actually worked, details they'd never bothered to learn in their 40-plus years of receiving monthly checks. How the funds were structured through a Cayman Islands holding company I controlled, how a single signature from me could liquefy everything. The real issue, I concluded, is that none of you ever paid attention when your father tried to teach you about money. You assumed it would always be there like air or water. Well, consider this your wake-up call. That evening, alone in my study, I called my real lawyer, not the family attorney my children had assumed I'd use, but Valentina Moreau, a sharp-minded woman who'd helped me structure several hostile takeovers in the 90s. They've made their move, I told her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And you want to proceed with the Prometheus Protocol? That was our code name for the financial nuclear option I'd prepared years ago. Yes, but let's give them one more chance to come to their senses. What my children didn't know, what they'd never bothered to learn, was that their mother wasn't just some elderly widow pottering around with flowers. Before I met their father, I was Helena Frost, the woman who turned a failing textile company into a pharmaceutical empire. I'd survived boardroom coups, hostile takeovers, and market crashes that sent stronger companies into bankruptcy. The next morning, I sent each of them a single orchid from my collection, along with a note. Beauty can be deceptive. The most delicate-looking orchids are often the most resilient. Let's discuss our family's future over dinner. Love, Mother. 3 of them ignored the message. Only Beatrice called, crying. Mama, she said. She hadn't called me that since she was 12. I'm so sorry, I never wanted. Preston said you were giving everything away to charity, that soon there'd be nothing left for us. And you believed him? He showed us the donations, the checks you've been writing. I've given away $1 billion in the last 5 years, it's true. But I've made $3 billion in the same period. Did Preston mention that? Silence. What have you been doing, little bee, all these years with your trust fund? Trying to write, she whispered. But I'm not good enough. I'm not like you. You're 39 years old. When I was your age, I was rebuilding a company from bankruptcy. The difference isn't talent, darling. It's hunger. You've never been hungry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through Thornfield's halls, past portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods, dating back to the Revolutionary War. My husband's family had been old money, the kind that believed work was something other people did. When we married, they were horrified that I refused to give up my company. Why work when you don't have to? His mother had asked. Because I want to, I'd replied. Now I understood the real problem. My children had inherited their father's family's attitude toward money, that it was something that simply existed, like gravity. They'd never learned the joy of creating something from nothing, the satisfaction of solving impossible problems, the thrill of making something grow. The court date approached like a summer storm. My children hired a team of lawyers that probably cost more than most people's houses. They'd lined up witnesses, household staff who'd supposedly seen me talking to thin air. I was actually using my Bluetooth earpiece. Society friends who'd observed my erratic behavior. I'd stopped attending boring charity luncheons, and, of course, Dr. Wexler, who'd prepared a 40-page report on age-related cognitive decline. What they hadn't done was actually talk to me. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in my favorite Chanel suit, the one I'd worn while negotiating the merger that made me my first billion. I arrived at the courthouse early, accompanied only by Valentina and a young associate. My children's legal team took up an entire row of seats. Preston kept checking his Patek Philippe watch, the same model his father had worn. I wondered if he knew I'd bought it for his father as an anniversary present. Judge Martha Reeves, a woman I'd met several times at fundraisers, called the hearing to order. Preston's lead attorney, a shark in Armani named Gerald Blackstone, began his opening statement. Your Honor, we're here today because Helena Blackwood's children are deeply concerned about their mother's mental state. Over the past year, she's exhibited increasingly erratic behavior, massive charitable donations, firing long-term employees, and most concerning, a complete personality shift that suggests the onset of dementia. I scribbled a note to Valentina. Personality shift? I've always been this way. They just never paid attention. Dr. Wexler testified for 2 hours about cognitive decline, memory issues, and the dangers of leaving vast fortunes in the hands of the elderly. He was very convincing, right up until Valentina began her cross-examination. Dr. Wexler, in your report, you note that Mrs. Blackwood made a $50 million donation to marine research. Are you aware that she made similar donations in 1998, 2005, and 2014? No, I wasn't. And this supposedly erratic behavior of firing her husband's former secretary. Did you know that Mrs. Blackwood has been trying to retire him for 15 years, but kept him on at half duties out of kindness? That wasn't mentioned to me. One more question, Doctor. Your research institute has received approximately $40 million in grants from the Blackwood Foundation over the past 20 years. Were you concerned this might represent a conflict of interest? His face reddened. I maintain complete professional objectivity. Of course you do, Valentina smiled. The real turning point came when Preston took the stand. He painted a picture of a confused old woman frittering away the family fortune, making impulsive decisions, forgetting important events. Just last month she forgot my daughter's birthday, he said, looking appropriately sorrowful. When it was Valentina's turn, she asked only one question. Mr. Blackwood, is your daughter's name Madison or Addison? Preston blinked. Addison. Why? Valentina turned to me. Mrs. Blackwood, would you tell the court what you sent your granddaughter for her birthday? A first edition of Anne of Green Gables, I replied. Addison loves classic literature. She's writing her senior thesis on Lucy Maud Montgomery. We discuss books every Sunday when she comes for tea. Preston's confident expression wavered. Your Honor, Valentina said, I'd like to submit evidence item 47, a thank you note from Addison Blackwood to her grandmother dated last month. I quote, Dearest grandmother, thank you for the amazing gift. You're the only one who remembers I prefer books to jewelry. I can't wait to discuss it this Sunday. Love, Addie. The courtroom was silent. Finally, Judge Reeves spoke. Mrs. Blackwood, would you like to address the court? I stood smoothing my skirt. Your Honor, I'm 75 years old. I've run a billion-dollar company, raised 4 children, and survived the death of my husband. Yes, I talk to my flowers. I have for 50 years. Yes, I give away large sums to charity. It's my money to give. And yes, I fired an elderly employee with a generous severance package and continued health benefits. I looked at my children. What concerns me isn't my mental state. It's that my children have reached middle age without developing any skills beyond spending their trust funds. They've never held jobs, never created anything, never faced real challenges. Their attempt to have me declared incompetent isn't about protecting me. It's about protecting their comfortable lives. Judge Reeves studied the documents before her. Mr. Blackstone, your evidence seems to consist primarily of the fact that Mrs. Blackwood is generous with her own money and occasionally eccentric in harmless ways. Unless you have something more substantial. The lawyer scrambled through his papers while my children whispered frantically among themselves. Finally, Preston stood up. Your Honor, could we request a brief recess to confer with our client? You have 10 minutes. I watched them huddle in the hallway, their expensive lawyers gesticulating wildly. Beatrice kept glancing back at me, her expression tortured. When court reconvened, Preston stood again. Your Honor, we'd like to withdraw our petition. Very well. Case dismissed. Judge Reeves banged her gavel. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught Preston's arm. Family dinner tonight. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. That evening, all 4 of them sat at the dining table like children awaiting punishment. I'd chosen the menu carefully. Simple roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, the same meal we used to have for Sunday dinners when they were young. Before we discuss today's events, I began, I want you to understand something. Your trust funds currently hold approximately $50 million each. Not an insignificant sum, but at your current spending rates, you'll be broke within a decade. They shifted uncomfortably. However, each trust also contains stock options in Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, options that vest only when certain conditions are met. Conditions your father and I wrote very carefully. What conditions? Cordelia asked. Achievement conditions. Creating a profitable business, earning an advanced degree, making a significant contribution to society, the sorts of things that prove you're capable of handling real wealth. I set down my fork. Those options are currently worth approximately $200 million each. The silence was deafening. Your father believed in being self-made. I disagreed. I think there's nothing wrong with inherited wealth, provided you prove you deserve it. So we compromised. You get enough to live comfortably, but the real fortune that you have to earn. Why didn't you tell us? Sebastian demanded. We did, repeatedly, but you were all too busy spending your allowances to listen. I smiled. Now, who wants dessert? After dinner, Beatrice lingered. Mama, what if we can't do it? What if we're not like you? Then you'll live comfortable, unremarkable lives on your trust funds. But darling, you'll never know what you're capable of until you try. I actually have been working on something. A novel. I didn't want to tell anyone in case I failed. But failure isn't the end of the world, Bea. Never trying is. The next morning, I did something my children weren't expecting. I kept my promise. Using the Prometheus protocol, I liquidated their current trust funds, all $200 million. Then I placed the money in new trusts with much stricter conditions. They could access funds for education, starting businesses, or charitable work, but not for houses, cars, or parties. The family group chat exploded. Preston, you can't be serious. Cordelia, this is insane. Sebastian, I have bills to pay. Only Beatrice remained silent. A week later, Valentina called with interesting news. Preston applied to business school, Harvard Executive MBA program. Really? And Cordelia's restructuring her gallery. She's actually written a business plan. A good one. What about Sebastian? He's got a job interview. Entry-level position at a tech startup. And Beatrice? Enrolled in the Iowa Writers' Workshop. I smiled, looking out at my orchids. Sometimes the best fertilizer for growth is a little adversity. 6 months later, at my 76th birthday party, my children looked different. Preston had lost weight and gained confidence from actually learning something. Cordelia's gallery was showing a profit for the first time. Sebastian was excited about coding, actually creating something instead of just investing in others' creations. And Beatrice had published her first short story. You know, Preston said during his toast, I spent my whole life thinking Mom was just lucky, that she married into money and got even luckier in business. I never realized how much work it takes, Cordelia finished. How creative you have to be, added Sebastian. How brave, Beatrice concluded. I raised my champagne flute. To late bloomers. Sometimes we need a forest fire to trigger new growth. Later that night, alone in my greenhouse, I thought about the ghost orchid. It doesn't grow in soil but anchors itself to trees, drawing nutrients from air and rain. For years, botanists thought it was parasitic until they realized it was actually symbiotic. The tree provided support, while the orchid helped funnel nutrients to its host's roots. My children had been parasites, feeding off their trust funds without giving anything back. Now, perhaps, they could become symbiotic, using their inheritance as a foundation to create something worthwhile. A year later, Beatrice's novel hit the New York Times bestseller list. The dedication read, "To my mother, who taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." Preston's first business venture, a pharmaceutical consulting firm, landed a major contract. Cordelia's gallery was featured in Art Forum magazine as the comeback story of the year. Even Sebastian surprised me, developing an app that helped elderly people manage their medications. Inspired by Grandpa Jameson, he told reporters. At our next family dinner, the conversation was different. Instead of complaints about traffic or gossip about friends, they discussed market trends, plot developments, coding challenges, and client negotiations. They asked my advice and actually listened to the answers. Mom? Preston said as dessert was served. "We've been thinking. The family foundation has gotten a bit stagnant. We'd like to propose some new initiatives." I hid my smile behind my napkin. "I'm listening." As they outlined plans for supporting young entrepreneurs, funding arts education, and investing in medical research, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. They weren't just spending their inheritance anymore, they were building on it. The court hearing that was meant to strip me of my power had instead stripped them of their complacency. In trying to take control of the family fortune, they'd finally learned its true value. That night, I updated my will. The Prometheus Protocol had served its purpose, and it was time to prepare for the next generation. But this time, I made sure. The conditions for inheritance included one non-negotiable requirement. Each beneficiary had to spend at least 1 year running their own business before they could access the full family fortune. My grandchildren would learn what my children were only now discovering, that real wealth isn't what you inherit, but what you create. 2 years after the court hearing, Forbes ran a profile on our family titled The Blackwood Renaissance. The journalist asked me about my secret to raising successful children. "I didn't," I said. "I raised dependent children who became successful adults only when they had to. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the opportunity to struggle." The article featured a family photo taken in my greenhouse. All 4 of my children stood among the orchids, each holding the symbol of their new venture: Preston with his business cards, Cordelia with gallery catalogs, Sebastian with his tablet showing his latest app, and Beatrice with her second novel. But what the photo couldn't capture was the change in their eyes. The entitled glaze was gone, replaced by something I recognized from my own reflection: the quiet confidence of people who'd earned their place in the world. On my 78th birthday, my children threw me a surprise party. The guest list included their business partners, creative collaborators, and mentors they'd found along the way. As I watched them work the room, networking, making deals, sharing ideas, I thought about that morning 3 years ago when they'd tried to have me declared incompetent. "You know," Dr. Wexler said, approaching with a glass of champagne, "I owe you an apology." "For what? Being bought and paid for?" He laughed nervously. "For underestimating you, and for overestimating your children, though I must say they've changed remarkably." "People rise or fall to meet expectations, Doctor. I simply adjusted their expectations." Beatrice interrupted us, pulling me toward the greenhouse. "Mama, we have something to show you." Inside, my children had arranged a new display. 4 pedestals held 4 rare orchids, each with a small plaque. Preston's read, Dendrobium. Preston Blackwood, resilient, late blooming, thrives under pressure. Cordelia's, Cattleya cordelia, transforms adversity into beauty. Sebastian's, Cymbidium Sebastian, proof that hybrid vigor creates the strongest blooms. Beatrice's, Phalaenopsis, Beatrice, delicate appearance, iron constitution. "We had them specially cultivated," Beatrice explained. "Each one is a hybrid developed from your prize specimens." "But that takes years," I said, genuinely surprised. Preston grinned. "We started right after the court hearing. We figured if we were going to learn the family business, we should start with your first love, orchids." I examined each bloom carefully. They were exquisite, each showing characteristics of my best specimens but with subtle improvements. Like their namesakes, they'd taken the foundation I'd provided and created something new. "There's one more thing," Cordelia said, leading me to a 5th pedestal. The orchid was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Pure white petals with gold edges, large and resilient, yet maintaining an ethereal beauty. The plaque read, "Helena's crown, mother of modern orchids, blooms continuously, redefining what's possible." "We submitted it to the International Orchid Registry last month," Sebastian said. "It's officially recognized as a new species." For the first time in 3 years, I felt tears in my eyes. Not from sentiment, but from recognition. They finally understood. Success wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about creating something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after you were gone. That night, after everyone had left, I sat in my study and pulled out the real Prometheus protocol. Not the simple trust fund restructuring I'd used 3 years ago, but the complete document, the one that would determine the future of the entire Blackwood Empire. I made a few final adjustments, then called Valentina. "Are you sure about this?" she asked after reviewing the changes. "They've earned it," I said. "Besides, I'm curious to see what they'll do with real power." The next morning, I gathered my children in the conservatory. "3 years ago, you tried to have me declared incompetent," I began. "Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd say. You were partially right." They looked at each other, confused. Not about my mental capacity, but about the future of this family's wealth. I am getting older, and it's time to transition leadership. But not in the way you originally imagined. I handed each of them a folder. "Effective today, you're all appointed to the board of Blackwood Enterprises. Not as figureheads, but as active directors with real responsibilities. Preston, you'll oversee business development. Cordelia, cultural initiatives and branding. Sebastian, technology and innovation. Beatrice, social impact and communications." "But what about you?" Preston asked. "I'll remain as chairman for 5 more years, long enough to guide the transition. But not so long that you can't develop your own vision." "And the fortune?" Sebastian asked, because of course he would. "Stays exactly where it is, in a trust that requires unanimous board approval for major decisions. If you want to control the family wealth, you'll have to work together." They spent the rest of the morning asking questions, debating strategies, and for the first time in their lives, thinking about the future beyond their next trust fund payment. 3 months later, at our first official board meeting, I watched my children present their division plans. They were still rough around the edges, still learning, but they were engaged. They cared. Halfway through the meeting, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Blackwood Pharmaceuticals announces revolutionary gene therapy for rare orchid disease. I smiled. Sebastian's team had cracked it, the genetic issue that had been killing ghost orchids in the wild. He'd taken my passion for flowers and combined it with cutting-edge science to create something entirely new. "One more thing," I said, as the meeting concluded. "I've decided to step down as chairman earlier than planned. Effective immediately, you'll need to elect your own chair." "But you said 5 years," Cordelia protested. "I lied," I shrugged. "Consider it your final test. Running a multi-billion-dollar empire is about more than following a plan. It's about adapting when circumstances change." They stared at me, then at each other. "I nominate Preston," said Beatrice. "I second," added Sebastian. "I think Cordelia should do it," Preston countered. "She's got the best vision for the company's future." "What about rotating leadership?" Cordelia suggested. "A different chair each year?" And then, for the first time in their lives, my children had a business discussion that wasn't about their personal interests. They debated structure, governance, succession planning, all the things I'd tried to teach them years ago. I slipped out quietly, leaving them to figure it out. In my greenhouse, I found Mrs. Abernathy tending to the orchids. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than expected," I said, picking up my pruning shears. "Though I suspect they'll realize within a week that I'm still controlling the purse strings through the foundation." "And when they figure that out," I smiled, examining a new bloom on my ghost orchid, "then they'll have learned the most important lesson in business. Always read the fine print. But by then, hopefully, they'll be too interested in the work to care about the money." Outside, Storm clouds gathered, promising rain for my thirsty orchids. Inside the conservatory, 4 middle-aged children were finally growing up, learning that the real family legacy wasn't money in a vault, but the ability to create something worth inheriting. As the first drops began to fall, I thought about that morning 3 years ago when they'd tried to take everything from me. In the end, by trying to steal their inheritance, they'd finally earned it. Sometimes the best fertilizer really is adversity. And sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give their children is the opportunity to become better than they ever imagined possible, even if it requires a little creative pruning. The next morning, my personal assistant Margaret arrived at Thornfield Manor with a stack of files thicker than my grandmother's Bible. Her usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, suggesting she'd been working through the night. "Everything you requested, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, setting the documents on my mahogany desk, including the forensic accounting report on your children's spending patterns over the past decade. I opened the first folder and couldn't help but whistle softly. Preston spent $3 million on a yacht he's used exactly twice? "The inheritance expected," Margaret confirmed. "Currently docked in Monaco, accumulating marina fees of $30,000 per month." "Creative name," I muttered, flipping to Cordelia's file. "And my artistic daughter's gallery has lost how much?" $18 million over 15 years. Though she did sell one painting last year, to her hairdresser's cousin, at a 90% discount. Sebastian's cryptocurrency ventures made for particularly entertaining reading. He'd managed to invest at the peak of every bubble and sell at the bottom of every crash, demonstrating an almost supernatural ability to lose money. "What about Beatrice?" Margaret hesitated. "Her spending is different. Mostly writing workshops, retreats, and a surprising number of charitable donations to literacy programs." I closed the files and walked to my window, gazing out at the manicured grounds of Thornfield. The morning mist was lifting from the lake, revealing the small island where my husband and I had built a gazebo 40 years ago. We'd spend evenings there, planning our future, discussing business strategies, dreaming of the legacy we'd leave behind. "Margaret, do you remember when Mr. Blackwood was alive? How he used to say that money was like water. It finds its own level." "I do. He also said that a fool and his fortune are soon parted, but a wise man makes his fortune work for others." "Exactly." I turned back to my desk. "Contact the Prometheus team. It's time to implement Phase 1. The Prometheus protocol wasn't just about liquidating trust funds. It was a complete restructuring of the family wealth that I'd been planning for 20 years. My late husband Charles and I had designed it during a particularly difficult period, when Preston had crashed his third Ferrari and tried to sue the dealership for selling him a defective vehicle. "Are you certain about the timing?" Margaret asked. "With the court hearing pending?" "The timing is perfect. They've shown their hand. Now I'll show them mine." That afternoon, I visited my private banker, Nathaniel Chen, at the Excelsior Trust building downtown. The 40-story glass tower housed the financial institution that had managed Blackwood wealth for 3 generations. "Helena," Nathaniel greeted me warmly. "I've been expecting you. The unusual activity in your children's accounts triggered our alerts." "They're planning something bigger than just the competency hearing," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Have you seen the communications between their lawyers?" He slid a tablet across the desk. "They're exploring something called a coordinated asset protection strategy. Essentially, they want to transfer all family assets into a new trust they control, citing your alleged mental decline as justification." I scrolled through the email chains, noting the astronomical legal fees they were accumulating. They're using their trust fund money to pay lawyers to help them steal more trust fund money. There's a certain poetic irony to it. "What would you like to do?" "Activate the Prometheus protocol, all of it." Nathaniel's eyebrows rose. "That's comprehensive." You realize this will effectively redistribute every penny of their accessible funds into charitable foundations, educational trusts, and locked investment vehicles they can't touch for 20 years? Yes, I'm aware. And the stock options? Especially the stock options. Convert them to performance-based instruments. They want the family fortune? Let them earn it. He pulled out a series of documents. I'll need your signature on about 300 pages. I brought my good pen. As I signed document after document, I thought about the day Charles and I had created these safeguards. We'd just returned from visiting his family in Newport, where his cousins, trust fund babies all, were living lives of spectacular uselessness. One was trying to become a professional polo player, despite a profound lack of coordination. Another claimed to be writing the great American novel, but hadn't produced a single page in 5 years. Our children will be different, Charles had insisted. Will they? I'd asked. Or will they just find more creative ways to waste their inheritance? Now, 30 years later, I had my answer. The signing took 3 hours. By the end, my signature had devolved from elegant cursive to something resembling abstract art, but every document was legally binding. When will they notice? I asked. The automatic payments stop at midnight tonight. They'll know by breakfast tomorrow. Perfect. I'm hosting a family brunch at 10. That evening, I dined alone in the conservatory, surrounded by my orchids. The ghost orchid had produced a new bloom, a rare occurrence that botanists considered good luck. I raised my wine glass to it. To new beginnings, I toasted, and necessary endings. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made the maple trees around Thornfield look like they were on fire. I'd instructed Mrs. Abernathy to prepare a full English breakfast, enough cholesterol to ensure my children would need their excellent health insurance, which, coincidentally, was about to be terminated. They arrived precisely at 10, looking like they'd dressed for a funeral. Preston's suit was rumpled. Cordelia's designer dress was inside out. Sebastian hadn't shaved, and Beatrice's eyes were red from crying. "Mother," Preston began without preamble, "what have you done?" "Good morning to you too, darling. Sausage?" "Our trust funds are gone," Cordelia shrieked. "Everything, even my emergency credit cards are declined." "I had to take an Uber," Sebastian added, as if this were the greatest indignity imaginable. An Uber pool, with strangers. Beatrice said nothing, just stared at her plate. I buttered my toast methodically. "The trusts aren't gone. They've been restructured according to the provisions your father and I established when you were born." "What provisions?" Preston demanded. "The ones in the paperwork you never read. Section 47, subsection 12. In the event that beneficiaries attempt to undermine the grantor's authority or prove themselves unworthy of fiduciary responsibility, all assets shall be redirected to approved charitable organizations until such time as the beneficiaries demonstrate appropriate capability." That's insane. Cordelia stood up, knocking over her orange juice. "You can't just—" "I can, and I have. Your former trust funds are now supporting 237 different charities. The Preston Blackwood Fund for Displaced Maritime Workers, the Cordelia Blackwood Arts Education Initiative, the Sebastian Blackwood Technology Literacy Program, and the Beatrice Blackwood Young Writers Fellowship." "You named them after us?" Sebastian looked confused. "Of course. You should get credit for your generosity, even if it was involuntary." Preston's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "We'll fight this. Our lawyers have already been informed that their retainers were paid from trust funds that no longer exist. I doubt they'll continue working pro bono." "This is abuse," Cordelia cried. "Elder abuse. We'll report you to—" "To whom? The authorities? The same ones who will investigate why 4 unemployed middle-aged adults were trying to have their mentally competent mother declared incompetent?" Silence fell over the breakfast table. The only sound was Mrs. Abernathy refilling coffee cups with admirable composure. Finally, Beatrice spoke. "What do you want from us, Mother?" I set down my fork and looked at each of them in turn. "I want you to become the people your father and I hoped you'd be. Not perfect, not brilliant, just capable, productive, maybe even happy." "Happy?" Preston laughed bitterly. "You've just destroyed our lives." "No, darling, I've destroyed your lifestyle. There's a difference." I stood and walked to the sideboard where Margaret had left 4 manila envelopes. "These contain the terms of your new financial reality. You'll each receive a monthly stipend, enough to live modestly but not enough to live idly. Additional. Funds are available for education, starting businesses, or charitable work, but every cent must be justified with receipts and progress reports." "This is humiliating," Cordelia muttered. "This is opportunity," I corrected. "Do you know what I was doing at your age? Working 16-hour days to save my grandfather's textile company. Your father was building his first pharmaceutical lab in a converted garage. We didn't have trust funds to fall back on." "But you married into money," Sebastian protested. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. "Is that what you think? When I married your father, the Blackwood family was land-rich and cash-poor. They owned this estate but couldn't afford to heat it. I'm the one who built the fortune you've been living on." Their shocked expressions suggested this was news to them. "The prenup your grandparents insisted on protected their family assets from me," I continued. "It didn't protect my money from them. Every penny in those trust funds came from companies I built, deals I negotiated, risks I took. But, Father always said." Preston trailed off. "Your father was a brilliant scientist but a terrible businessman. I loved him dearly, but if I'd left the finances to him, we'd all be living in that converted garage." I returned to my seat and picked up my coffee cup. "Now, who wants to hear about the opportunities I've arranged for each of you?" "Opportunities?" Cordelia asked warily. "Preston, I've spoken to my friend Sarah Winters at Goldman Sachs. She's willing to offer you an entry-level position in their analyst program. You'll need to pass the Series 7 exam first, of course." Preston's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Cordelia, the Museum of Modern Art needs someone to help catalog their acquisition archives. It's not glamorous, but you'll learn how a real art institution operates." "I'd be working in a basement?" "Everyone starts somewhere. Sebastian, there's a coding boot camp starting next month. Complete it successfully, and I've arranged an internship at a startup that actually has revenue." "Coding? But I'm a venture capitalist. You're a gambler with other people's money. There's a difference." Finally, I turned to Beatrice. "The Iowa Writers' Workshop has a spot in their spring program. I've paid the tuition. The rest is up to you." Beatrice's eyes widened. "The Iowa? But that's the best program in the country. How did you—" "I've read your work, darling. The pieces you think no one knows about. You have talent. You just need discipline." Tears began rolling down her cheeks. "You read my writing?" "Every word, including that novel manuscript you hid in the pool house." The room fell silent. Again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. Less angry, more thoughtful. "What if we refuse?" Preston finally asked. "Then you survive on your stipend and make your own way. But the opportunities won't be offered twice." "And if we succeed?" This from Sebastian. "Then we'll discuss the second phase of your inheritance, the real money." "What's the real money?" Cordelia asked. I smiled. "The 49% of Blackwood Enterprises that your father left in trust for you, currently worth approximately $8 billion. The silence that followed was absolute. "But," I continued, "accessing it requires meeting specific benchmarks, building successful businesses, contributing to society, proving you can handle wealth responsibly. You mean all this time? Preston's voice was faint. All this time, you've been living on allowances while sitting on one of the largest private fortunes in America, but it was locked away until you proved yourselves worthy of it. Why didn't you tell us? Beatrice asked. Would it have made a difference? You had everything you needed. The question was whether you'd ever want more than comfort. I stood, signaling the end of breakfast. You have until Monday to decide. In the meantime, I suggest you read those envelopes carefully. Your new life starts now. As they filed out, looking dazed, Beatrice lingered. Mother? The workshop? Do you really think I could get in? You already did. I sent them your story, The Garden of Artificial Flowers. The acceptance letter is in your envelope. She threw her arms around me, the first genuine hug I'd received from any of my children in years. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. The hard work is just beginning. After they left, I returned to my orchids. The ghost orchid's new bloom was fully open now, its delicate white petals defying every law of probability. In the wild, they were nearly extinct. In cultivation, they were considered impossible to grow. Yet here it was, thriving against all odds. My phone buzzed. A text from Valentina. Phase 1 complete. Charitable transfers confirmed. Are you ready for the media storm? I typed back. Let it come. The truth has a way of surviving scandal. Because that was the part my children didn't know yet. Their attempt to have me declared incompetent wasn't just a family matter. Someone had leaked it to the press. By tomorrow, the business pages would be full of stories about the Blackwood family drama. I'd spent 40 years building not just a fortune, but a reputation. My children were about to learn that maintaining both required more than just a famous last name. The conservatory door opened, and Margaret entered with her tablet. The Wall Street Journal wants a comment about the competency hearing. Also, 3 of the charities have already issued press releases thanking you for the unexpected donations. I schedule a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. Full disclosure about the trust restructuring. That will put significant pressure on your children. Good. Pressure creates diamonds, or reveals coal. That evening, I received 4 phone calls. Preston, panicking about the media attention. Cordelia, furious about her public embarrassment. Sebastian, trying to negotiate better terms. And Beatrice, asking if I'd read her other stories. All of them, I told her. You have a gift, darling. Stop hiding it. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid of failing. Afraid of not being good. Enough. Fear is the enemy of greatness. Your father used to say that fortune favors the brave. Dad was brave? Your father left a tenured position at Harvard to start a biotech company with equipment he bought at auction. His parents disowned him. His colleagues thought he was insane, but he believed in his research. I never knew that. There's a lot you don't know about your parents. We weren't always wealthy. We were just willing to take risks. After hanging up, I sat in Charles's old study, surrounded by photos of our early years. The cramped apartment where we'd lived while building the company, the celebration when we got our first patent, the day we went public and became millionaires on paper but still couldn't afford to repair our car. We'd worked so hard to give our children everything we didn't have. In doing so, we'd failed to give them the one thing that had made us successful: hunger. The next morning, financial news exploded with the Blackwood story. Pharmaceutical heiress cuts off children's trust funds. Blackwood family feud rocks Wall Street. Billionaire matriarch chooses charity over children. My favorite headline came from Forbes: Helena Blackwood's Masterclass in Succession Planning. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the Excelsior Hotel's Grand Ballroom. I chose my outfit carefully. A navy Chanel suit that suggested authority, without ostentation, minimal jewelry, and my reading glasses to appear grandmotherly. Image mattered in these situations. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, and financial analysts. I recognized faces from Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Financial Times. Good. International coverage would make it harder for my children to spin the narrative. I opened with prepared remarks about fiscal responsibility, philanthropic obligations, and the importance of earning rather than inheriting wealth. Then came the questions. Mrs. Blackwood, your children claim you're suffering from dementia. How do you respond? I respond by noting that dementia patients rarely restructure billion-dollar trusts with perfect legal precision. Next question. Is it true you've left your children penniless? They each receive a monthly stipend equivalent to the average American middle-class income. If that's penniless, we need to have a national conversation about wealth inequality. What about claims of elder abuse? The only abuse here is of the trust fund system. My children are learning what their father and I always knew. Money earned tastes sweeter than money given. The questions continued for an hour. I answered each one calmly, precisely, turning what could have been a scandal into a story about values, responsibility, and the burden of inherited wealth. Afterward, Valentina pulled me aside. Your children are in the lobby. All of them? All of them. They don't look happy. I found them huddled near the elevator, trying to avoid reporters. Preston stepped forward as I approached. That was brutal, he said. That was necessary. You've humiliated us publicly, Cordelia added. No, darling. You did that yourselves when you tried to have me declared incompetent. I simply refused to let you control the narrative. What happens now? Sebastian asked. Now you decide. Accept the opportunities I've offered and begin building real lives, or continue sulking and live on your stipends. Either way, the old free ride is over. Beatrice stepped forward. I've decided. I'm going to Iowa. Her siblings stared at her. It's the best writing program in the country, she continued. And Mom's right. I've been hiding behind excuses for too long. You're taking her side? Preston asked incredulously. I'm taking my own side, for the first time in my life. I watched as something shifted in the group dynamic. Beatrice, always the youngest, the quietest, the one they dismissed, was suddenly the leader. You know what I realized? She continued. We've spent our entire lives waiting for our trust funds to vest, waiting for Mom and Dad to die so we could inherit everything, waiting for life to happen to us instead of making it happen ourselves. Easy for you to say, Cordelia snapped. You actually have talent. How would you know? When's the last time you created anything original instead of buying someone else's work to resell? When's the last time any of us actually tried to be good at something? The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Sebastian spoke. The coding boot camp. Is it really only a month? 6 weeks, I corrected. Intensive training, 80 hours a week. I might try it. Might isn't enough. Commit or don't? He took a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. 2 down, 2 to go. Cordelia was next. The MoMA position. Would I really be working in the basement? The archives are climate-controlled, state-of-the-art facilities where you'd handle millions of dollars worth of art. You'd learn proper curation, authentication, restoration techniques, everything you need to run a legitimate gallery. I suppose I could try it for a few months. Preston remained silent, his jaw clenched. The Goldman offer stands until Friday, I told him. After that, they'll fill the position with someone else. An entry-level position, he muttered. At my age. Your age is irrelevant. Your lack of experience is the issue. I have an MBA from Wharton, which you've never used. Theory without practice is just expensive paper. He glared at me, then at his siblings, then back at me. Fine. I'll take the position. But when I prove myself, I want full access to the family holdings. Prove yourself first, then we'll discuss access. As they dispersed, each heading toward their uncertain futures, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the false hope of inherited wealth solving all problems, but real hope born from the possibility of growth. That night, alone in my study, I pulled out the second phase of the Prometheus Protocol. This was the part my children didn't know about, the part that would truly test their mettle. Hidden in various Blackwood Enterprises subsidiaries were positions I'd been holding for years. A seat on the board of our biotech division for someone with Preston's financial background. An art acquisition fund waiting for someone with Cordelia's eye for beauty. A venture capital arm focused on sustainable technology that needed Sebastian's passion for innovation, and a publishing imprint that could use Beatrice's literary sensibilities. But they'd have to earn their way to these positions. No shortcuts, no nepotism, no easy paths. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Harrison Wexler. Helena, I owe you an apology. You owe me $60,000 in expert witness fees that you'll need to return, but go on. I let myself be manipulated. Your children painted a very convincing picture of cognitive decline. Did they? Or did you see what you expected to see in a wealthy woman of a certain age? He sighed. Perhaps both. In any case, I've officially withdrawn my assessment and will be issuing a statement to that effect. Unnecessary, but appreciated. How much did they pay you? I'd rather not. Harrison, I funded your research for 2 decades. The least you can do is be honest. $200,000, plus promises of ongoing support for my new clinic. I laughed. They were spending their trust funds to bribe you to help them steal more money. There's a certain circular absurdity to it. What happens to them now? Now they learn what you and I have always known, that real satisfaction comes from achievement, not inheritance. After hanging up, I walked through Thornfield's quiet halls. The portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors seemed to watch my progress. Most of them had inherited their wealth, passed it down through generations without adding to it. Charles and I had broken that pattern, building something new from the remnants of old money. Now it was our children's turn to decide what kind of Blackwoods they would be. I ended my evening, as always, in the conservatory. The Ghost Orchid had produced a second bloom, almost unheard of in cultivation. I made careful notes in my journal, documenting the temperature, humidity, and care regimen that had led to this miracle. Science, patience, and careful tending had achieved what most experts considered impossible. Perhaps the same approach would work with my children. The next morning brought a surprise. Margaret arrived with news that Preston had not only accepted the Goldman position, but had requested all the study materials for the Series 7 exam. He also asked for your old business school textbooks, she added. Did he? They're in the library, 3rd shelf. The margins are full of my notes. Should I send them? No. Tell him where they are. If he wants them badly enough, he can come get them himself. An hour later, Preston's Mercedes pulled into the drive. He found me in the library, already pulling books from the shelves. I haven't been in here in years, he admitted, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with books on everything from ancient philosophy to modern coding. Your father spent every evening here. He said it was his thinking room. I remember. He tried to get me interested in science books. And you preferred video games. I was a kid. You were 18. Your father had already published 3 papers by that age. Preston picked up one of my old textbooks, flipping through pages covered in handwritten notes. You really annotated everything. Knowledge without application is worthless. I tested every theory against real-world experience. He sat down, still holding the book. Why didn't you push us harder when we were young? We pushed. You pushed back. After a while, it seemed kinder to let you find your own way. Instead, We found our way to your bank account. That wasn't entirely your fault. We made money. Too accessible. Consequences too remote. And now? Now you have a chance to surprise yourself. And me. He took 7 books, loading them carefully into his car. As he drove away, I noticed something different in his posture. He sat straighter, moved with more purpose. Maybe it was my imagination, but I chose to see it as a beginning. The text from Beatrice came that afternoon. Submitted my application to Iowa. Also wrote 3,000 words today. Thank you for believing in me. I responded, I've always believed. Now you believe too. Sebastian's boot camp began the following Monday. He sent daily updates, a mix of complaints about the difficulty and excitement about what he was learning. Did you know you can build an entire application in JavaScript? One message read, Did you know your mother holds 3 software patents? I replied, What? From the early days of digital pharmaceutical modeling, check the USPTO database. The ensuing flood of questions made me smile. None of my children had ever shown interest in what I'd actually done to build our fortune. They'd simply enjoyed its benefits. Cordelia's first day at MoMA was rocky. She called during her lunch break, nearly in tears. They have me wearing white gloves and cataloging donation records from the 1950s. What have you learned? That major collectors often donated pieces for tax advantages rather than artistic merit, and that provenance is everything. And that some of the most valuable pieces in the collection were considered worthless when they were first acquired. Sounds like you're learning quite a bit for someone just filing papers. I suppose. Did you know they have 3 Picassos? That have never been displayed because they can't verify the ownership history. I did not. Tell me more. As she launched into an enthusiastic explanation of art authentication, I realized something profound was happening. My children were discovering curiosity. 2 weeks into their new lives, I convened a family dinner. This time, the conversation was different. I passed my first coding assessment, Sebastian announced proudly. I identified a misattributed Rothko. Sketch in the archives, Cordelia added. Goldman put me on a team analyzing pharmaceutical mergers, Preston said. I actually understood most of the science because of Dad's old notebooks I found in the library. Beatrice smiled shyly. I got into Iowa. Full scholarship based on my portfolio. Then perhaps it's time we discussed Phase 2, I said. They all looked at me expectantly. Your father and I didn't just leave you trust funds. We left you a pathway to real wealth, both financial and personal. The trust funds were merely the first test. What's the second test? Preston asked. Building something of your own. Each of you has 1 year to create something valuable. A business, a project, a demonstrable achievement that benefits others, not just yourselves. And if we succeed, then we'll discuss your roles in Blackwood Enterprises. The company needs fresh leadership, new perspectives, but only from people who understand the value of building rather than just inheriting. What kind of roles? Cordelia asked. The kind that match your proven abilities. We have divisions waiting for leaders who understand both legacy and innovation. You planned all this, Sebastian said slowly. The trust fund restructuring, the entry-level positions, everything. I planned for possibilities. Your father and I always knew this day might come, the day when comfort bred complacency. We built mechanisms to shock you awake if necessary. And if we'd never tried to have you declared incompetent, then you'd have continued living comfortable, meaningless lives until the trust funds ran out naturally. This way, you have a chance at something more. Preston raised his wine glass. To Mother, who apparently plays chess while we've been playing checkers. To your father, I corrected, who insisted that our children have second chances, even if they squandered their first ones. As they clinked glasses, I saw Charles in their faces, his determination in Preston's eyes, his creativity in Cordelia's smile, his curiosity in Sebastian's questions, his kindness in Beatrice's heart. They were becoming, finally, the people we'd hoped they'd be. Later that night, I received an email from one of the charities, the Preston Blackwood Fund for Displaced Maritime Workers. They'd used his involuntary donation to retrain 50 former shipping employees for new careers in renewable energy. I forwarded it to Preston with a note. Your money is already changing lives. Imagine what you could do if you directed it consciously. His reply came at midnight. I'm starting to understand. Thank you for not giving up on us. Parents never do, I wrote back. We just sometimes have to get creative. As I prepared for bed, I glanced at the Prometheus protocol files more time. Phase 3 remained locked in my safe, the final test that would determine whether my children truly deserved to inherit one of the largest private fortunes in America. But that was for another day. Tonight, I would celebrate small victories. Preston studying, Cordelia discovering, Sebastian coding, Beatrice writing. The ghost orchid in my conservatory had produced a third bloom, a botanical impossibility that reminded me that sometimes, with the right conditions and careful tending, even the most unlikely transformations could occur. My children were finally growing into themselves. It had taken 75 years of my life and the complete destruction of their comfortable existence. But perhaps that was the price of genuine change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, I allowed myself to hope that the Blackwood legacy would continue, not just in money, but in character, creativity, and conscience. After all, the greatest inheritance isn't what you leave to your children. It's what you help them become. 6 months into their new lives, I noticed the first real changes in my children during our monthly family dinner. Preston had lost 20 pounds and gained a focused intensity I remembered from his father's early research days. He spoke animatedly about market analysis and merger strategies, using terms that would have been foreign to him just half a year ago. The Stanton Industries acquisition is fascinating, he said, cutting his steak with precise movements. Their pharmaceutical division is undervalued by at least 40%. If someone were to separate it from their consumer products arm, someone like Blackwood Enterprises? I asked innocently. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. I wasn't suggesting. Why not? It's a good observation. I've been watching Stanton for months. His eyes lit up with an excitement I hadn't seen since he was 12 and discovered baseball statistics. Their patent portfolio alone is worth $3 billion, but the market's focused on their failing cosmetics line. Send me your analysis. If it's thorough enough, I'll forward it to our acquisitions team. Cordelia, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Speaking of acquisitions, did you know MoMA is considering selling some of their secondary collection pieces? Budget constraints. Are they now? There's a series of early Rothko sketches that don't fit their current curatorial vision. They're looking for private collectors who will commit to occasional public exhibitions. And you think we should buy them? I think the Blackwood Foundation should buy them. We could create a rotating exhibition program with regional museums, bring major art to smaller cities. I studied my daughter's face. 6 months ago, she would have suggested buying art for her personal gallery. Now she was thinking about public access and cultural education. Write a proposal. Include budget projections and potential museum partners. Sebastian cleared his throat. Since we're talking about proposals, my bootcamp final project got some attention. 3 venture capital firms reached out. What kind of project? An app that uses AI to help elderly patients manage multiple medications. It tracks interactions, sends refill reminders, and can alert family members if doses are missed. Interesting. What made you choose that particular problem? He glanced away, then back. I remembered all of Grandfather Jameson's pill bottles. how confused he got toward the end. I thought, maybe I could prevent that for other families. Beatrice had been writing notes throughout dinner, a new habit she'd developed at Iowa. I interviewed Jameson last month, she said quietly, for a piece about caregivers. He told me about how you made sure he had round-the-clock care, even though he wasn't family. He served your grandfather for 40 years. Loyalty deserves loyalty. He said something else, that you could have put him in a home, but instead you bought him a cottage and hired nurses to help him stay independent. What's your point, Beatrice? That maybe we inherited more than money from you. Maybe we inherited your values too. We just needed to lose everything else to find them. The table fell silent. I sipped my wine, considering my response. Values without action are just pleasant thoughts. What matters is what you do with them. Preston set down his fork. Mom, when we tried to have you declared incompetent, where did that idea come from? It wasn't really mine. Whose was it? Rex Hamilton. He said elderly parents often resist necessary wealth transfers, that sometimes legal action was required for their own good. Rex Hamilton. I should have known. He'd been circling the Blackwood fortune for years, using his position as social advisor to wealthy families to identify vulnerable targets. And he offered to handle everything discreetly? I asked. For a percentage of the estate under management. He said it was standard practice. I laughed, though without humor. Rex Hamilton has built his career on exploiting family conflicts. Did you know he approached your father 20 years ago with a similar proposal about me? My children stared. Charles was going through cancer treatments. Rex suggested that I might be overwhelmed, managing both the company and a sick husband. He offered to help establish a conservatorship for my own protection. What did Dad do? Beatrice asked. He threw Rex out of the hospital room. Then, he called our lawyers and made sure every legal document specified that I had sole control of everything if he died. But you gave us access to the trusts, Preston said. Controlled access, limited access, the kind that builds appetite but not satisfaction. Your father thought it would motivate you to earn more. Instead, it made you dependent on an allowance. We were stupid, Cordelia said bluntly. No, you were typical. Wealth creates its own form of blindness. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Urgent. Hamilton's lawyers filed motion regarding health evaluation requirement. I excused myself and called Valentina. Rex isn't giving up, she said without preamble. He's arguing that Massachusetts law requires anyone over 70 to undergo cognitive evaluation when controlling assets over $1 billion. There's no such law. He's citing an obscure statute about fiduciary responsibility. It's a reach, but he found a sympathetic judge. Judge Randolph? How did you know? Rex's golf partner. They've been playing together at the club for 15 years. I returned to the dining room where my children were quietly arguing about whose fault the competency hearing had been. We have a problem, I announced. Rex Hamilton is making another move. They fell silent. He's trying to force a cognitive evaluation through a friendly judge. If I refuse, it could be grounds for appointing an external conservator. But you already proved you're competent, Sebastian protested. This isn't about competence. It's about creating legal complications until I make a mistake or pay him to go away. What do we do? Preston asked. I noticed his use of we and felt a small surge of hope. We fight back, but differently this time. Rex expects me to use lawyers and delay tactics. Instead, I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. Mother, no, Cordelia said. You can't let him evaluate you. Not him. But I'll undergo the most comprehensive cognitive assessment available. Public, transparent, and administered by specialists from 3 different institutions. That's brilliant, Preston said slowly. He can't object without looking suspicious. Exactly. And while he's focused on that, you four are going to help me with something else. What? Rex has been running this scheme for years. The Blackwoods aren't his only targets. I want you to find his other victims. Sebastian straightened. Like an investigation? Like due diligence. The same skills you're learning in your new careers can be applied to this. Preston, you analyze financial patterns. Cordelia, you research the art collections of families Rex has helped. Sebastian, you dig into digital records. Beatrice, you interview people. We're going after him? Beatrice asked. We're going to expose him, legally, publicly, and thoroughly. That night, I sat in Charles's old study, reviewing files on Rex Hamilton. He'd attached himself to 7 prominent families over the past decade. In each case, elderly members had been declared incompetent, assets had been transferred, and Rex had walked away with millions in consulting fees. The Morgans lost their newspaper empire. The Chandlers saw their hotel chain divided and sold. The Weatherbys' art collection was scattered to private buyers. But they all had something in common. Children who'd never worked, who lived off family trusts, who were easily manipulated by promises of greater wealth. My phone rang. Preston. Mom, I've been going through SEC filings. Rex has a pattern. He always structures deals through a Cayman Islands holding company called Legacy Ventures LLC. Good work. Keep digging. Cordelia called next. 3 families Rex helped had major art collections. All were liquidated through the same auction house, Sotheby's. But here's the interesting part. The pieces were consistently undervalued, then resold 6 months later for much higher prices. To whom? Shell companies that trace back to, wait for it, Legacy Ventures LLC. Sebastian's research revealed digital footprints, emails, calendar appointments, social media connections. Rex has a network, lawyers, doctors, judges. They all belong to the same country club. Beatrice had spent her evening calling family friends. Mrs. Chandler wants to talk. She says what happened to her mother was criminal, but they couldn't prove anything. Arrange a meeting, discreetly. The next morning, I scheduled my cognitive evaluation at Massachusetts General Hospital. 3 renowned neurologists would administer comprehensive tests over 2 days. The results would be public record. Rex called within an hour of the announcement. Helena, this isn't necessary. We can resolve this privately. I prefer transparency, Rex, don't you? Transparency can be complicated. Your family's private matters might become public. Are you threatening me? I'm offering advice, as a friend. We've never been friends, Rex. You're a parasite who feeds on family dysfunction. That's harsh. That's accurate. I'll see you in court. I hung up and called a press conference for that afternoon. Standing before 24 reporters, I announced my voluntary cognitive assessment. Then I dropped the bombshell. I've also established a $10 million fund to investigate financial elder abuse among wealthy families. Too often, complex legal schemes are used to separate seniors from their assets. The Blackwood Foundation will provide resources to expose these practices. The questions came fast. Is this related to your recent family dispute? Are you suggesting elder abuse in your own case? Who will oversee this fund? I smiled. The fund will be managed by a panel of experts in finance, law, and elder care. As for my own situation, I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs. This evaluation will confirm that. But I'm concerned about others who might not have the resources to fight back. That evening, my children gathered in the library. They'd transformed it into a war room. Whiteboards covered with timelines, laptops running searches, documents organized in neat piles. We found 8 more families, Preston reported, all with the same pattern. Rex targets them, creates conflict between generations, then swoops in as the solution. He's been doing this for 23 years, Sebastian added. We traced his first case, the Astors, in 2001. What happened to them? I asked. Complete. Family breakdown. The children fought over the estate for 6 years. Rex made $12 million in fees. Cordelia had been quiet, studying photos on her laptop. Mom, look at this. She turned the screen toward me. It showed a charity gala from 2015. In the background, barely visible, were Rex and Judge Randolph deep in conversation. This was 2 weeks before the Weatherby case went to Randolph's court. Good eye. Print that photo. Beatrice walked in, looking shaken. I just got off the phone with Jessica Weatherby. She wants to join our investigation. She says her grandmother tried to warn them about Rex, but they thought it was paranoia. How much did they lose? Everything. $400 million in assets, sold at discount prices. The family's fighting over the scraps while Rex lives in a mansion in Beacon Hill. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the October moon illuminated the grounds of Thornfield Manor. This estate had been in the Blackwood family for generations, but I hadn't inherited it. I'd bought it back from creditors when Charles's father had mortgaged it to cover gambling debts. 30 years ago, I said without turning around, this house was weeks away from foreclosure. Your grandfather had borrowed against everything. The banks were circling like vultures. My children looked up from their work. I was running Blackwood Pharmaceuticals out of a rented office in Cambridge. We had one promising drug in trials, but no money to complete them. Charles was working 2 jobs while finishing his doctorate. How did you save it? Preston asked. I didn't save it. I bought it. Sold my grandmother's jewelry, emptied our savings, borrowed against the company's future earnings. The banks thought I was crazy. Who pays full price for a mortgaged estate? But why? Beatrice asked. Because some things are worth more than their market value. This house isn't just property. It's our family's history. Rex Hamilton sees only assets to be stripped and sold. I see legacies to be preserved and built upon. I turned back to face them. That's what he doesn't understand about us. We don't just inherit. We create. We don't just preserve. We improve. And we don't let parasites feed on what we've built. The next 2 days of cognitive testing were exhausting but satisfying. The neurologists put me through memory tests, problem-solving exercises, psychological evaluations, and brain scans. I completed complex financial scenarios, solved multivariable mathematics problems, and demonstrated strategic thinking through elaborate business simulations. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead evaluator, seemed impressed. Mrs. Blackwood, your cognitive function is exceptional for any age. Your memory scores are in the 99th percentile, and your executive function tests show the kind of strategic thinking we typically see in people half your age. I stay active. This is beyond staying active. Your brain shows the plasticity of someone who continuously challenges themselves with new learning. The results were released publicly, along with a detailed report that left no doubt about my mental capacity. Rex's legal maneuver had backfired spectacularly, but he wasn't finished. 3 days later, Valentina called with disturbing news. Rex has filed an emergency motion. He's claiming you're being unduly influenced by your children. My children? The same ones who tried to have me declared incompetent? He's arguing that you've been manipulated into forgiving them, that they're controlling you through emotional abuse. This is desperate even for Rex. Desperate people do dangerous things. He's also been reaching out to former Blackwood Enterprises board members, suggesting the company needs new leadership. I sat back in my chair, considering the chess board. Rex was making wild moves, hoping something would stick. But his desperation revealed something important. We were getting close to exposing his entire operation. Valentina, prepare a RICO lawsuit. Against Rex? Against his entire network, racketeering, fraud, conspiracy, the works. That's a nuclear option. He came after my family. Now I'm coming after his empire. That afternoon, I called my children together. They arrived looking tired but determined. Preston in a suit from his Goldman Sachs job, Cordelia with paint under her fingernails from the museum, Sebastian carrying his laptop, Beatrice with her ever-present notebook. Rex is escalating, I told them. He's going after the company now. What do we do? Preston asked. We escalate faster. I'm filing a RICO suit that will expose his entire operation. But I need more evidence. We have plenty, Sebastian said, opening his laptop. I've been tracking money flows. Every consultation fee Rex received went through a web of shell companies before landing in offshore accounts. And I've mapped out his network, Cordelia added. 23 lawyers, 16 financial advisors, 8 doctors, 5 judges, all connected through business relationships or social ties. The families are talking to each other now, Beatrice reported. Jessica, Weatherby has been connecting victims. They're sharing documents, comparing notes. Rex's pattern is identical in every case. Preston stood and walked to the whiteboard. Here's what I don't understand. Rex is already rich. Why take these risks? It's not about money, I said. It's about power. Rex doesn't just want wealth, he wants control over other people's legacies. I walked to my desk and pulled out a file. 25 years ago, Rex tried to marry into the Cabot family. Old Boston money, Mayflower descendants. They rejected him as unsuitable. So this is revenge? Beatrice asked. This is obsession. He couldn't join the old families, so he destroys them. Takes their money, their homes, their heirlooms, makes them fight each other while he profits from the chaos. That's sick, Cordelia said. That's Rex. My phone buzzed. An unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. Helena, we need to talk. Rex sounded strained. We are talking. In person, privately. This has gone too far. Has it? I'm just getting started. I have information about Charles. Things you don't know. Things that could hurt your family's reputation. I felt my jaw tighten. If you had anything real, you'd have used it already. Your husband had secrets, Helena. Everyone does. Do you really want them exposed in court? Try me. I hung up and looked at my children. He's bluffing. What if he's not? Preston asked. Your father was the most ethical man I ever knew. Whatever Rex thinks he has, it won't survive scrutiny. But a small doubt gnawed at me. Charles had been private about his early life before we met. His family had been notoriously secretive, typical of old money that preferred shadows to spotlight. That evening, alone in my study, I opened Charles's old files. Boxes of documents I'd never examined from before our marriage. Financial records, correspondence, legal papers dating back to his father's era. What I found shocked me. Charles's father hadn't just been a bad businessman. He'd been involved in criminal enterprises, money laundering, tax evasion, connections to organized crime. Charles had spent his early 20s quietly cleaning up the mess, paying off debts, settling with authorities, distancing himself from his father's associates. He'd never told me. He'd carried this burden alone, protecting me and our children from the shame of the Blackwood name's criminal past. I sat back, understanding dawning. This was what Rex had found. Not secrets about Charles himself, but about his father. In the court of public opinion, it wouldn't matter. The headlines would scream Blackwood crime family, and our reputation would be destroyed. I called my children back to the library. Rex has leverage, I told them simply. Your grandfather was involved in criminal activities. Your father spent years covering it up legally, paying restitution, making amends. Rex plans to use this to discredit us. They absorbed this in shocked silence. Finally, Beatrice spoke. So what? Dad cleaned it up. He did the right thing. The public won't see it that way. They'll see generations of criminality. Then we get ahead of it, Preston said. We tell the story ourselves. Frame it as Dad's redemption narrative. Or, Sebastian suggested, we use it against Rex. He's literally blackmailing us with information about past crimes. Isn't that illegal? Cordelia had been thumbing through her phone. Actually, look at this. She showed us an article from the Boston Globe dated 1982. Grandfather's activities were already exposed. There was a whole investigative series. It's public record. I read the article, memory flooding back. Of course, the scandal had been huge news. Charles and I had met shortly after, when he was rebuilding the family reputation. Rex doesn't have secrets, I realized. He has old news he's hoping we've forgotten about. We all started laughing, the relieved, slightly hysterical laughter of people who'd just dodged a bullet. So we proceed? Preston asked. We proceed. But first, let's give Rex one last chance to back down. I composed an email. Rex, the information you have about James Blackwood is public record from 1982. Charles spent his life atoning for his father's crimes, which is more than you can say about your own activities. You have 24 hours to withdraw all legal actions against my family and return the fees you've stolen from others. Otherwise, I file the RICO suit. Your move. Helena. The response came within an hour. You're making a mistake. I have powerful friends. I replied, so do I. The difference is mine aren't co-conspirators. The next morning, I filed the lawsuit. 97 pages detailing Rex's 23-year scheme to defraud wealthy families. Named defendants included judges, doctors, lawyers, and financial advisors who'd participated in the conspiracy. The media exploded. Blackwood matriarch exposes massive elder fraud ring. Boston society rocked by inheritance scam allegations. RICO suit names half of Beacon Hill. Rex's powerful friends abandoned him immediately. Judge Randolph recused himself from all Blackwood-related cases. The country club expelled him. His co-conspirators rushed to make plea deals. Within a week, Rex's carefully constructed network collapsed. My children, energized by their success, threw themselves into helping the other victimized families. Preston worked with forensic accountants to trace missing assets. Cordelia helped families recover artwork that had been undervalued and sold. Sebastian created a secure database for sharing evidence. Beatrice wrote a series of articles exposing the psychological manipulation tactics used against elderly family members. The Massachusetts Attorney General opened a criminal investigation. Federal authorities joined in. Rex's assets were frozen pending investigation. 6 weeks after I filed the lawsuit, Rex Hamilton was arrested at Logan Airport trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. He was charged with 37 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. At our next family dinner, the atmosphere was celebratory but also reflective. You know what I realized? Preston said. 6 months ago, I couldn't have done any of this. I didn't have the skills or the confidence. None of us did, Cordelia agreed. We were so focused on protecting our inheritance that we never developed anything worth inheriting. Dad would be proud, Beatrice said quietly. Of all of us, I added. You've become the people he always believed you could be. Sebastian raised his glass. To second chances. To earned chances, I corrected. You created these opportunities through hard work. What happens now? Preston asked. With Rex going to prison, the other families recovering their assets? Now, we focus on the future. Blackwood Enterprises needs innovation. The foundation needs fresh perspectives, and I need to know the company will thrive after I'm gone. Are you saying, Cordelia started, I'm saying you've proven yourselves capable of more than spending money. Now let's see if you can help create it. I pulled out 4 folders. These are your real inheritances. Not trust funds, but positions within the company that match your developing skills. They come with salaries, not allowances. Responsibilities, not privileges. You'll report to division heads, not to me. They opened the folders slowly, like children unwrapping gifts they're not sure they deserve. Preston would join the mergers and acquisitions team. Cordelia would head a new arts and culture initiative. Sebastian would work with the technology incubator. Beatrice would lead corporate, communications and social impact. These are entry-level positions, Preston noted. With advancement potential based on performance, I said. Just like every other employee. We could fail, Sebastian said. You could, but I don't think you will. You've already faced failure and survived. That's the most valuable lesson in business. Beatrice was crying quietly. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank yourselves for finally showing up. That night, I sat in Charles's study for the last time. Tomorrow, I would convert it into a family workspace where my children could collaborate on their new roles. I opened his journal to the last entry, written days before his death. Helena worries the children are too dependent. I worry she's too hard on them. But perhaps we're both right. They need to fail before they can succeed. They need to lose everything before they can appreciate anything. I trust Helena to know when to let them fall and when to catch them. Our legacy isn't the money, it's the values. Everything else can be rebuilt. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf, next to photos of our early years, the struggling years, the building years, the years when every decision mattered and every dollar counted. My children were about to discover what Charles and I had always known, that wealth created through effort is infinitely more satisfying than wealth received without struggle. The Blackwood legacy would continue, but transformed. Not as a birthright, but as an opportunity. Not as an inheritance, but as a responsibility. And perhaps that had been the plan all along. 2 years after joining Blackwood Enterprises, my children had transformed from reluctant employees into driven executives. Preston had orchestrated 3 successful acquisitions, including the Stanton Industries deal he'd first identified at that family dinner. Cordelia's cultural initiative had partnered with 17 museums nationwide, bringing art to underserved communities. Sebastian's medication management app had been acquired by our digital health division for implementation across all Blackwood hospitals. Beatrice had rebranded our corporate communications, turning what had been dry quarterly reports into compelling narratives about our research and community impact. But success, I've learned, brings its own challenges. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing proposals for our new oncology research center. Margaret's voice held an unusual tension. There's a situation developing with Preston's division, she said. You should turn on CNBC. The breaking news banner read, Blackwood Pharmaceuticals Insider Trading Investigation, SEC probes recent acquisition. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. Get Preston on the line. And call Valentina. Preston answered on the first ring. Mom, I swear I didn't. Stop. Don't say anything over the phone. Come to my office. Bring everything related to the Stanton acquisition. 20 minutes later, Preston sat across from me, his face pale, but his jaw set with determination. The confident executive bearing he'd developed over 2 years hadn't completely crumbled, but I could see the scared child underneath. Walk me through it, I said. The SEC received an anonymous tip that someone bought Stanton stock 2 days before we announced the acquisition. They're suggesting it came from inside Blackwood. Did it? I don't know. But Mom, I was so careful. Every communication went through legal. Every meeting was documented. I learned from watching you. I did everything right. Valentina arrived with preliminary information. The trades originated from a brokerage account in the Caymans. Shell company registration. Professional job. How much? $50 million in Stanton stock, Whoever did this made approximately $200 million when the acquisition was announced. Preston's hands were shaking. If this sticks to me, it could bring down the whole company, everything we've built. First rule of crisis management, I said firmly. Don't panic. Second rule, gather facts before making assumptions. I called an emergency meeting with all 4 children. They arrived within the hour, abandoning their various responsibilities across the company. Someone's trying to frame Preston, I announced without preamble. We need to figure out who and why. Cordelia immediately spoke up. This feels like Rex Hamilton's playbook. Attack through the children to get to the parent. Rex is in federal prison, Sebastian pointed out. But his network isn't, Beatrice said quietly. I've been tracking the civil lawsuits. Several of his associates avoided criminal charges. They're rebuilding. I studied my youngest daughter. You've been monitoring them? Someone had to. We destroyed their operation, but we didn't destroy their motivation. They lost everything because of us. Because of their own crimes, Preston corrected. That's not how they see it. Beatrice pulled out her laptop. Look, Richard Stavros, Rex's former attorney. He's been acquiring distressed pharmaceutical assets for the past year. Small companies mostly, but he's building something. Sebastian leaned forward. I can trace the Cayman account. Give me access to our forensic systems. No, I said sharply. You're all too close to this. We handle it professionally. Cordelia, contact Ernst & Young's forensic division. Sebastian, coordinate with our IT security team but don't touch anything yourself. Beatrice, compile everything you have on Rex's former associates. What about me? Preston asked. You continue business as usual. Don't hide. Don't change. Your routine. Innocent people don't act guilty. Over the next week, the investigation intensified. The SEC interviewed Preston 3 times. The financial press speculated wildly about corruption in the Blackwood Empire. Our stock price dropped 12%. But we'd learned something in our battle with Rex Hamilton. Transparency is the best defense against false accusations. I called another press conference. Blackwood Enterprises welcomes the SEC investigation, I announced to a room full of skeptical reporters. We're providing complete access to our records, our communications, and our personnel. We're also conducting our own forensic investigation to identify the source of these trades. Mrs. Blackwood, a reporter called out, isn't it convenient that your son spearheaded the acquisition in question? This looks like classic nepotism gone wrong. I smiled, coldly. What's convenient is how this allegation surfaced just as Preston Blackwood was finalizing a deal that would have disrupted certain competitors' market positions. We don't believe in coincidences. The forensic team worked around the clock. Sebastian, despite my orders to stay removed, fed them insights about system vulnerabilities. His coding boot camp and subsequent tech experience had given him skills I hadn't anticipated. 5 days into the investigation, he burst into my office. Mom, they're not just framing Preston. They're coming after all of us. Explain. I found hidden code in our trading system. It's been capturing keystroke data for months. They know every trade we've considered, every analysis we've run. How did you find this if you weren't supposed to be investigating? He had the grace to look sheepish. I may have been running parallel analysis on my personal systems. Of course you were. What else? The code has signatures. Coding style is like handwriting. Everyone has tells. This matches samples from Stavros's previous company. I called Valentina. We need warrants, now. The wheels of justice moved faster when billions were at stake. Within 48 hours, federal agents raided Richard Stavros's offices. They found more than we'd hoped. Detailed plans to discredit the Blackwood family, frame Preston for insider trading, and ultimately force a sale of company assets at distressed prices. But Stavros wasn't the mastermind. The documents revealed a familiar name, Victoria Ashford, Rex Hamilton's former mistress and a financial advisor who'd narrowly avoided indictment in our original RICO case. She blames us for Rex's downfall, Beatrice said, reading through the seized communications. Listen to this email. The Blackwoods destroyed everything. They turned Rex's partners against him, took his freedom, his reputation. Now they'll understand what it feels like to lose everything. Hell hath no fury, Cordelia murmured. This isn't about fury, I corrected. It's about money. Stavros and Victoria aren't just seeking revenge. They're trying to force us to sell assets they can acquire cheaply. Preston, who'd been silent during the briefing, finally spoke. So I'm just collateral damage? A tool to attack the company? No, I said firmly. You're a threat. Your acquisition strategy has been brilliant. You've identified undervalued assets before anyone else. They targeted you because you're good at your job. The SEC cleared Preston 2 days later. The press cycle moved on to other scandals. Our stock recovered and then surged to new highs. As investors realized, the attack had actually revealed the strength of our corporate governance. But the experience had changed something fundamental in my children's relationship with the company and with each other. We can't keep playing defense, Preston said at our next family meeting. Every time we succeed, we make new enemies. Welcome to business, I replied. But you're right. We need to be more strategic about protection. Cordelia surprised me. I've been thinking about that. What if we create a family council? Not just for Blackwood Enterprises, but for all our interests. Share intelligence, coordinate strategies, watch each other's backs. Like a corporate version of family dinner, Sebastian added. Exactly. We meet monthly, review threats and opportunities, make decisions together. I sat back, watching my children plan their collective future. 2 years ago, they'd been willing to declare me incompetent for access to trust funds. Now they were designing governance structures to protect each other. There's something else, Beatrice said. I've been working on a book about our family's transformation, about what happened with Rex Hamilton, what we learned, how we changed. Beatrice, that's private family business, Preston protested. No, it's a universal story. How many families are destroyed by wealth? How many second generations squander what their parents built? We nearly became another cautionary tale. Instead, we're an example of what's possible when failure becomes education. She's right, I said. But if you publish this story, you need everyone's consent, and you need to tell the complete truth, including the ugly parts. They all looked at each other, then back at me. Including the part where we tried to have you declared incompetent? Cordelia asked. Especially that part. And the part where I deliberately let you fail. Where I watched you struggle and didn't intervene. Where I chose the company over comfort, legacy over luxury. Why would you want that public? Sebastian asked. Because shame thrives in silence. And because other families might learn from our mistakes. The book took Beatrice another year to write. She interviewed all of us extensively, reviewed thousands of documents, spoke with employees and competitors. The result was unflinching in its honesty. When The Blackwood Reckoning, How Losing Everything Saved a Family Fortune hit bookstores, it immediately climbed bestseller lists. Business schools added it to their curriculum. Family offices recommended it to clients. But more importantly, it sparked conversations in wealthy families worldwide. I received letters from parents struggling with entitled children, from heirs who recognized themselves in my children's early portraits, from elderly executives fearing their life's work would be squandered. The book's success also brought unexpected opportunities. Preston was invited to speak at Harvard Business School about ethical acquisitions. Cordelia's museum partnerships expanded internationally. Sebastian's health tech innovations attracted top talent wanting to work for a company with values. Beatrice became a sought-after speaker on family business dynamics. 5 years after that first confrontation in my conservatory, We held our monthly family council in the same room. The ghost orchid had propagated, its offspring now blooming throughout the greenhouse. "I have an announcement," I said as we settled into our seats. "I'm retiring as CEO." The silence was immediate but not uncomfortable. We'd been discussing succession planning for months. "Have you decided on your replacement?" Preston asked carefully. "The board has approved my recommendation. They agree that Blackwood Enterprises needs fresh leadership for the next phase of growth." I paused, enjoying the suspense. "Congratulations. Preston, you start in 3 months." His jaw dropped. "But I thought, we all assumed you'd bring in an outside CEO." "Why? You've proven yourself capable. You understand our values. You've earned the position." "What about us?" Sebastian asked, glancing at his siblings. "The new CEO will need strong division heads, people he trusts, people who understand that wealth creation and wealth preservation require different skills." Cordelia was already nodding. "We stay in our roles but report to Preston instead of you." "With one addition," I said. "I'm creating a new position, Chief Ethics Officer. Someone to ensure we never forget the lessons we've learned about power, privilege, and responsibility." I looked at Beatrice. "Your book showed you understand these issues better than anyone. Are you interested?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes. God, yes." "Then it's settled. Preston as CEO, Cordelia running cultural initiatives, Sebastian leading technology innovation, Beatrice as Chief Ethics Officer. The board meets tomorrow to formalize everything." "What will you do?" Preston asked. "Travel, teach, write my own book about building companies that outlast their founders, and enjoy watching my children exceed my accomplishments." That night, after the others had left, I found Preston alone in the conservatory, staring at the original ghost orchid. "Scared?" I asked. "Terrified. What if I fail? What if I destroy everything you and Dad built?" "Then you'll rebuild it, just like I did when your grandfather nearly lost everything. Just like you did when you lost your trust fund. Failure isn't the enemy, Preston. Complacency is." "How did you know? Back then, when you took everything away, how did you know we'd rise to the challenge?" "I didn't. I hoped. But I also knew that continuing to enable your dependency was guaranteeing failure. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is stop preventing consequences." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about my own kids. They're young still, but already I see the patterns. Private schools where no one fails, participation trophies, credit cards with no limits." "So, what are you going to do about it?" "Create age-appropriate challenges, chores linked to allowance, academic standards with real consequences. And, when they're older, maybe their trust funds will have performance metrics." I smiled. "The cycle of learning continues." "Mom? Thank you. For having the courage to let us fail. For believing we could be better. Thank your father. It was his idea to build escape hatches into your trust funds. He always said the money should be a safety net, not a hammock." The next morning, the board unanimously approved the succession plan. The press release went out at market close. Helena Blackwood to step down as CEO, Preston Blackwood named successor. The stock dipped briefly, markets hate change, then recovered as analysts noted the strength of the executive team and the smooth transition plan. Rex Hamilton, watching from federal prison, sent me a letter. I'd been receiving them monthly since his conviction, each one more bitter than the last. This one was different. "You won," he wrote. "Not just the legal battle, but the war for your children's souls. I studied your family for years, certain that privilege had made them weak. I was wrong. It wasn't privilege that weakened them. It was lack of purpose. When you took away their comfort, you gave them something more valuable, the chance to discover their capabilities. I've had 5 years to think about why I failed. I confused inheritance with achievement, entitlement with worth. You understood the difference. That's why your legacy will endure while mine crumbles. I filed the letter with the others but spent the evening thinking about his words. Rex had been wrong about many things, but he was right about one. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you inspire others to build. A month before my official retirement, I called one last family meeting. This time I included the grandchildren, Preston's 12-year-old twins, Cordelia's teenage son, Sebastian's 9-year-old daughter, and Beatrice's 6-year-old boy. I want to tell you a story, I began, looking at the young faces. About a ghost orchid that everyone said couldn't survive, and the family that learned to bloom in impossible conditions. The children listened with varying degrees of attention as I recounted a simplified version of our family's transformation. Their parents watched with knowing smiles, occasionally adding details or corrections. When I finished, Preston's daughter raised her hand. "Grandma, why did you take away their money if you loved them?" "Because sometimes love means letting. People struggle. If I had continued giving them everything, they never would have discovered what they could achieve on their own." "But what if they had failed completely?" "Then they would have learned from that failure and tried again." "The only real failure is never trying at all." Sebastian's daughter piped up. "My dad says he's glad you took his trust fund because now he gets to make video games that help people." "And he's very good at it," I confirmed, "but he had to learn how first." After the children were sent to play, my own children remained, seated. "You're not just retiring from the company, are you?" Beatrice asked perceptively. "This feels like a goodbye to something bigger." "I'm stepping back from active involvement in your lives," I admitted. "You don't need me anymore. You need space to make your own decisions, your own mistakes, your own triumphs." "But we'll still have family dinners?" Cordelia asked, suddenly sounding like the child she once was. "Of course. But as equals now, not as parent and children. You're the leaders now. I'm just a proud observer." Preston cleared his throat. "We've been discussing something. The family council wants to create a new foundation, not just for charity, but for education about wealth responsibility. We want to help other families avoid our mistakes." "Using Beatrice's book as a starting point," Sebastian added. "Creating workshops, resources, maybe even a retreat center here at Thornfield. We're calling it the Second Chance Foundation," Cordelia said, "for families who need to reset their relationship with wealth." I felt tears threatening, but held them back. "Your father would love this idea." "We know," Beatrice said softly. "We found his journals. He wrote about wanting to create something like this but not knowing how to start." "Now we do," Preston said, "because we lived it." My retirement party was held in the Blackwood Enterprises atrium with 500 employees, partners, and friends gathering to celebrate 40 years of leadership. The speeches were flattering, but what moved me most was watching my children work the room, not as heirs marking time, but as leaders who'd earned their positions. Midway through the evening, Valentina pulled me aside. "There's someone who wants to see you. She's waiting in your office." I found Victoria Ashford sitting in my guest chair, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. "I came to apologize," she said without preamble, "and to ask for something I don't deserve." "Go on." "The federal charges against me were dropped, but I'm finished in finance. No one will hire Rex Hamilton's former associate. I've lost everything. And I'm asking for a job, any job. I'll start at the bottom. I need a second chance." I studied her for a long moment. "Why should I trust you after you tried to destroy my son?" "Because I understand now what you were protecting. Not just money, but potential. I was so focused on revenge that I couldn't see what you'd actually done. Transformed spoiled heirs into capable leaders. I want to learn how to do that." "Come back Monday," I heard myself say, Beatrice is building a team for the Second Chance Foundation. If she agrees, you can start there. Minimum wage, probationary period, constant oversight. Her eyes widened. You're serious? Everyone deserves a second chance. But like my children learned, you have to earn it. After she left, I stood at my window, looking out over the city Charles and I had helped build. 40 years of decisions, crises, triumphs, and failures had led to this moment. Soon, Preston would occupy this office, making his own choices, facing his own challenges. My phone buzzed with a text from Beatrice. Family dinner Sunday? I'm cooking. I smiled, remembering when she could barely boil water. Now she hosted elaborate meals, bringing everyone together around her table. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. Another text from Sebastian. Kids want to know if they can tour the greenhouse. Something about a school project on rare orchids. Tell them I'll give them the full botanical lecture, I answered. Cordelia. Found a Rothko sketch at an estate sale, authenticated. Want to celebrate your retirement by adding to your collection? Send me the details, I typed back. Finally, Preston. Board meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Your last one as CEO. Prepared to be thoroughly appreciated and possibly embarrassed by a retrospective video. I'll bring tissues, I responded. As the party wound down, I made my way back to the greenhouse. The ghost orchid was blooming again, its white petals luminous in the moonlight. Around it, dozens of offspring thrived, each one a testament to patience, proper care, and the right growing conditions. My children had been like these orchids, rare, difficult to cultivate, requiring specific conditions to thrive. For too long, I'd given them the wrong environment, too much shelter, not enough challenge. When I finally corrected those conditions, they bloomed beyond my wildest expectations. The next morning's board meeting was indeed emotional. The retrospective video featured interviews with employees whose lives had been changed by our company's policies, patients who'd benefited from our research, and community leaders describing our local impact. But the final segment showed my children, each speaking about lessons learned. Preston. My mother taught me that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. Cordelia. She showed me that culture and commerce aren't opposites. They're partners in building meaningful organizations. Sebastian. I learned that innovation without ethics is just clever destruction. Beatrice. She proved that sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is step back and let their children discover their own strength. When the video ended, the boardroom was silent. Then, Preston stood. Helena Blackwood built this company on a simple principle, that wealth should create opportunity, not just comfort. As incoming CEO, I pledged to honor that principle. But I also recognized that my mother's greatest achievement wasn't building a Fortune 500 company. It was ensuring it would thrive without her. The applause that followed felt like a benediction. That afternoon, I cleaned out my office for the last time. 40 years of memories went into boxes, photos with Charles, early product prototypes, awards and recognition letters, children's drawings that had evolved from stick figures to business plans. I kept only one item on the desk, a small pot containing a cutting from the original Ghost Orchid. It would go to my new office at the foundation, a reminder that the rarest achievements often come from the most unlikely beginnings. Preston appeared in the doorway. Ready? Almost. I handed him an envelope. Your father wrote this when you were born. He asked me to give it to you when you became CEO. I think he always knew this day would come. He opened it slowly, read in silence, then looked up with tears in his eyes. He talks about potential versus privilege, about hoping I'd understand the difference. He says... Preston's voice broke. He says he's proud of the man I'll become. He was right. To be proud. You've exceeded both our expectations. We all have, because you gave us the chance to fail. No, I corrected gently. I gave you the chance to succeed. There's a difference. As I walked out of Blackwood Enterprises for the last time as CEO, I thought about the price of transformation. It had cost my children their comfort, their illusions, their easy paths. It had cost me their affection for several years, their trust for even longer. But what we'd gained was worth every moment of pain. 4 capable adults, a stronger company, a lasting legacy, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to shield those we care about from necessary growth. The ghost orchid cutting in my hands had already produced a tiny new shoot, reaching toward light it couldn't yet see. Like my children, like the company, like the foundation we were building, it was proof that with the right conditions, even the most improbable transformations are possible. Wealth, I'd learned, wasn't the inheritance you leave behind. It was the wisdom to know when to give everything and when to take it all away. My children had finally learned that lesson. Now it was time for them to teach it to the next generation. As I drove away from the office tower, my phone buzzed with one final text. From Preston. "Thank you for believing we could be better than we were. The next chapter starts now." I smiled, tucked the phone away, and headed home to Thornfield Manor, where new orchids were waiting to bloom. 10 years after I cleaned out my office at Blackwood Enterprises, I celebrated my 85th birthday at Thornfield Manor. The estate had evolved alongside our family. The formal gardens had given way to interactive botanical spaces where school children learned about conservation. The austere dining room had been transformed into a welcoming gathering place, and my precious greenhouse had expanded into a world-renowned orchid research center. "Grandmother, look!" My youngest grandchild, Sebastian's daughter Eliza, tugged at my sleeve. The new hybrid bloomed. I followed her to the special cultivation chamber, where the newest Blackwood orchid, a stunning fuchsia blossom with golden speckles, had finally opened. We'd been nurturing this particular crossbreed for 3 years. "What are you naming this one?" I asked, kneeling carefully to examine the petals. "Phoenix Bloom," she replied with the certainty of a 12-year-old who'd given the matter serious consideration. "Because it came back stronger after almost dying last winter." I smiled at the unintentional metaphor. Perfect name. The birthday celebration was quieter than the lavish parties of years past. Just family gathered on the terrace overlooking the lake, 4 generations of Blackwoods sharing stories and memories. Preston's grandchildren ran between tables. Cordelia's son discussed his latest gallery opening. Sebastian demonstrated his newest educational app, and Beatrice read excerpts from her upcoming memoir. During a lull in the festivities, Preston joined me at the edge of the terrace. The years had salted his hair with gray and deepened the lines around his eyes, but he moved with the confident posture of a man comfortable with his responsibilities. "The foundation is ready to launch in Asia," he said. "Beatrice has the curriculum finalized, and the Singapore team is trained." "And the company?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Under Preston's leadership, Blackwood Enterprises had flourished, expanding into new markets while maintaining the values Charles and I had established. Third-quarter profits exceeded projections by 22%. The new oncology drug is moving to Phase 3 trials, and the healthcare technology division won the federal contract. "That's not what I'm asking." He smiled, understanding. "My real question. The legacy is secure. We're building, not just maintaining." I nodded, satisfied. "And your children? Your grandchildren?" "Learning what we learned. No free rides, no shortcuts." Charlotte, my oldest granddaughter, just started in the mailroom despite her MBA. She was furious until I showed her my own company ID badge from my mailroom days. "And she's staying? Working harder than anyone. Says she's going to be CEO faster than I was." Good. Competition keeps families sharp. The party continued into evening, with toasts and speeches and grandchildren performing music they'd prepared. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the terrace, casting a warm glow over faces that shared my features, but carried their own distinct characters. Later, as guests dispersed to their respective wings of the manor, I retreated to my study, no longer filled with business documents but with personal correspondence, research papers on orchid propagation, and manuscripts from promising writers funded by our foundation. Beatrice knocked softly before entering with a wrapped package. "One more gift, Mom. From all of us." Inside was a leather-bound book titled The Blackwood Principles, 3 Generations of Wisdom. They'd compiled excerpts from Charles's journals, my business notes, their own hard-earned insights, and reflections from the grandchildren. "We're using this as the core text for the Foundation's curriculum," Beatrice explained, "but this copy is just for you." I opened to a random page and found my own handwriting from decades earlier. "Wealth without purpose creates dependency. Purpose without resources creates frustration. The balance between them creates legacy." I'd forgotten writing this, I admitted. "You didn't just write it, you lived it. And now thousands of families are learning from our mistakes." The second. Chance Foundation had grown beyond our initial vision. What started as a small program for wealthy families struggling with succession planning had expanded into a global institute addressing intergenerational wealth transfer in 37 countries. We'd worked with dynasties on the brink of implosion, helped entitled heirs find purpose beyond spending, and guided founders through the delicate process of letting go without losing control. Our methods weren't always gentle. We'd preserved the trust fund shock therapy that had worked so well with my own children, but they were effective. 93% of families who completed our program maintained both their wealth and their relationships through multiple generations. "Did you ever imagine this?" Beatrice asked, gesturing toward the book. "When you cut off our trust funds, did you see how far it would reach?" "I saw a possibility," I answered honestly. "But the reality has exceeded even my ambitious expectations." The next morning, I met with Victoria Ashford in the garden pavilion. The woman who had once tried to destroy my family had become one of our most effective counselors, specializing in families torn apart by revenge fantasies and perceived slights. "The Denali situation is stabilizing," she reported, referring to an oil family whose patriarch had recently threatened to disinherit his children. "We used your orchid metaphor. It resonated with him. The idea that some plants thrive best with a period of drought and stress. And the children? Initially resistant, now cautiously engaged. The daughter has particular promise. She's already started auditing the family accounts, looking for inefficiencies." "Good. Curiosity is the first step toward responsibility." Victoria had surprised us all with her transformation. After starting in an entry-level position at the foundation, she'd steadily worked her way to senior counselor, bringing unique insight into family dysfunction. Her own experience, both as Rex Hamilton's accomplice and as someone who'd lost everything and rebuilt, gave her credibility with our most challenging cases. "There's something else," she said hesitantly. "Rex is being released next month. Compassionate grounds, terminal cancer." I absorbed this information slowly. Rex Hamilton had been the catalyst for our family's transformation, though certainly not in the way he'd intended. His attempt to destroy us had instead forced us to become stronger, more resilient, more unified. "He's asking to see you," Victoria added. "One last conversation." "Why should I grant him that?" "He claims to have information about other victims, families who never recovered from his schemes, details that could help them find closure." I considered this. "Arrange it. But at the foundation, not here. And I want Preston and Beatrice present. I'll make the arrangements." 2 weeks later, I faced Rex Hamilton across a conference table at the Second Chance Foundation headquarters. The once imposing man had been reduced by illness and imprisonment to a frail figure in a wheelchair, but his eyes still held sharp intelligence. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would. You said you have information that could help families you harmed." "Straight to business. You haven't changed, Helena. Neither have you, apparently. Information, Rex, or this meeting ends now." He smiled thinly and pushed a flash drive across the table. Everything I remember: account numbers, transaction records, shell companies. There were 14 families, not just the 7 you identified. Some still don't know how they were targeted. Preston took the drive, his expression neutral but alert. "Why now?" "Consider it my own second chance. Not at freedom or wealth. Those are beyond my reach now. But perhaps at remembering what it felt like to create rather than destroy." "You never created anything," Beatrice said. "You only took from others." Rex's gaze shifted to her. "That's why I asked to see you specifically. You understand narrative better than anyone in your family. I want you to understand mine." "I've studied your case extensively for my book," she replied coolly. "Your background, your patterns, your motivations. There's nothing you could tell me that I don't already know. But there's something I know that you don't." He coughed, then continued. "Your grandfather, James Blackwood, wasn't just involved in criminal enterprises. He was my father's business partner." The room fell silent. I felt a cold shock of recognition. James had had many dubious associates, but this connection had never surfaced in our investigations. "My father lost everything in their final scheme," Rex continued. "James walked away wealthy enough to rebuild the family name, while my father went to prison. I was 7 years old. My mother committed suicide 6 months later." "And this justified targeting innocent families?" I asked. "Nothing justifies what I did. But understanding sometimes helps with closure. When I found myself specializing in wealthy family conflicts, the pattern emerged unconsciously at first. I was recreating my own trauma, inflicting it on others." Beatrice was making notes, her writer's instinct engaged despite her skepticism. "Why didn't you just come after the Blackwoods directly? Why destroy all those other families?" "Practice," Rex admitted. "I wanted to perfect my methods, and perhaps, deep down, I knew I couldn't succeed against Helena. She was too formidable an opponent." "Yet you tried anyway," Preston observed. "And in failing, I gave her the greatest gift possible, the catalyst to transform her children from entitled heirs into worthy successors. Ironic, isn't it? My attempt to destroy you ultimately saved you." I studied the diminished man before me, seeing not the monster who had threatened my family, but someone broken by circumstances partly of my father-in-law's making. The cycles of trauma and revenge had come full circle. "The information on the drive, is it complete?" I asked. "As complete as my fading memory allows. I hope it helps those families find some measure of peace." "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing you would give willingly. Understanding, perhaps, though I don't deserve even that." As Rex was wheeled away by his prison guards, Beatrice turned to me. "Will you tell the family? About James and Rex's father?" "Yes. The truth may be uncomfortable, but secrets are more dangerous than honesty. Besides, it's an important lesson about how damage passes through generations until someone makes a conscious choice to break the cycle." Later that day, I called a family meeting. All 4 of my children, their spouses, their adult children, and even the older grandchildren gathered in Thornfield's library. I shared Rex's revelation and watched their expressions shift from shock to thoughtfulness. "So, our great-grandfather's actions created the enemy who nearly destroyed us," Preston's daughter mused. "And in trying to destroy us, he inadvertently saved us." "The irony isn't lost on me," I acknowledged. "But the lesson is clear. Wealth without ethics leaves devastation in its wake. Our responsibility extends beyond our own family." Which is why the foundation matters, Beatrice added. We're helping break those cycles in other families. The information Rex provided led to the recovery of millions in hidden assets for the victimized families. For some, the discovery came too late to rebuild what they'd lost, but for others, it provided both financial resources and emotional closure. The foundation established a special division to work with these families, offering not just financial recovery services, but therapeutic support for the deep wounds caused by Rex's schemes. Victoria Ashford led this initiative, bringing unique insight to the healing process. A month later, Rex Hamilton died in prison hospice care. I sent flowers but did not attend the funeral. Our connection had been broken, our accounts settled. That fall, as my 86th birthday approached, I felt a subtle shift in my energy. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet awareness that my time was growing shorter. I asked for another family gathering. They came from around the world. Preston from a business summit in Tokyo, Cordelia from an exhibit opening in Paris, Sebastian from a technology conference in California, Beatrice from a book tour in London. They brought spouses, children, grandchildren, 4 generations of Blackwoods filling Thornfield Manor with life. In the conservatory, surrounded by orchids that would outlive me, I shared my final legacy plan. Not the division of assets, those had been meticulously arranged years ago, but the division of responsibility. The Blackwood fortune has survived, and thrived because we remembered its purpose, I told them. Not to provide comfort, but to create opportunity. Not to shield from difficulty, but to empower through challenge. Each generation must relearn this lesson. I pointed to the newest, orchid hybrid, Eliza's phoenix bloom, now fully established with multiple blossoms. Like these plants, wealth requires both care and stress to reach its full potential. Too much nurturing creates weakness. Too much hardship causes withering. The balance between them creates strength. My great-grandchildren listened with varying degrees of comprehension, but I knew the lesson would take root eventually, just as it had with their parents and grandparents. I've had the privilege of witnessing 3 generations of growth, I concluded, of watching entitled children become responsible adults, of seeing those adults raise children who understand the value of effort. My hope for you all is simple. Remember that the Blackwood name isn't your identity, it's your responsibility. Later, as the youngest children played on the lawn and the adults conversed on the terrace, I found myself alone with Preston, Cordelia, Sebastian, and Beatrice. My 4 challenges, my 4 triumphs. We've come a long way from that morning. In the conservatory, I said. When we tried to have you declared incompetent, Cordelia acknowledged with a wry smile. Not our finest moment. But the beginning of our best moments, Sebastian added. The day everything changed, Beatrice said. Preston took my hand. Thank you for having the courage to let us fail, for believing we could be more than we were. I always knew you could, I told them. You just needed the right conditions to bloom. As the autumn light faded and the first stars appeared above Thornfield Manor, I looked at what Charles and I had created. Not just wealth, but wisdom. Not just a family, but a legacy of purpose. The greatest fortune wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives transformed, lessons learned, potential realized. At 75, I had liquidated my children's trust funds overnight. At 86, I watched them steward a fortune they'd learned to earn. The journey between those moments had been difficult, painful, and absolutely necessary. That night, I added a final entry to my journal. The true measure of wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you enable others to become. Money can be counted. Legacy must be lived. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.